Well, today we're going to put in this wall oven, and it is about 27 and a half. We have 16 and a quarter. That'll be a piece of cake. Before doing this video, I thought, what does the internet need more of? And it's putting wall oven in videos. Now this one has to be I think it's a GE profile, something like that. It's a little convection oven, single oven. It's heavy enough being a single oven. You need two people to do the lifting of it, especially if it's a little confined like this up against the wall. It's a little awkward. We'll do what we can to minimize the weight by taking the door off, everything out as much as we possibly can. But unlike most videos that we see out there, they're just taking a cabinet that's already fitted for it and just replacing something that's there. That's a little easier than taking a virgin cabinet and taking a saw to it, especially if you have all new cabinets going in. You don't want to scar, cut anything up, and you don't want to make a mistake. So that's the excitement of this particular video. Make sure you have some help. Well, installing cabinets can be a daunting task, especially when it's part of an overall larger project, such as putting in a virgin kitchen in a new build or remodeling what you already have in place. Now this can be a long task involved with it because you need to pick out your appliances because they will drive your inputs and locations where you want everything to be. And that goes without saying, but you still need to think about it because with that comes interactions with your code people as you have to work in with the massive amounts of changes since the last time you've built a house or put a kitchen in. It's super easy, but you do have to have possibly new breaker upgrades. You have wire that needs to go in. Your ampacities may not be the same, so they can get larger depending on the particular appliance you want. And of course, you have to have all that arranged before you can put the rough end in and get that approved before you can proceed on to the next stage, which is getting the kitchen laid out. Which, if you're lucky, will only take a couple of 2 or 3 weeks to get that lined out and sized accordingly. But you have to have a basic plan, so that's not too hard. So with these 8 tips to how to help you get your kitchen put together, how to install your cabinets, 8 tips for cabinet installation. We'll start with number 8, which is stub a check. Now you may think, well, that's not all that easy because this stuff's already very expensive. But just remember, if you plan ahead, you can ease this task quite a bit. What the first thing you want to do is maybe crash someone's car, cause a financial crisis, and then offer them something like $600 to get you out of your mess. Now, this is not hard to do. All you need to do is be a member of Congress. And remember that when you put a person in a bind and then offer them a small amount of money to get them out of their immediate pain, that you need to get 91% out of every dollar that's being printed up for that use. So stub a check, number 8. Number 7, ask nicely. Yes, now you have what? 8,000 or so friends on social media if you'll add up all your accounts. All you need to do is ask nicely. Tell them what a unique environment that you have, what a situation, opportunity that they have to feel better about themselves by helping you out, and you'll have no trouble whatsoever getting responses. Now you'll want to make sure that they know that there's high-speed rotating equipment that can separate them from their digits and cause a massive blood loss and potential passing out. That's not a problem. Just remember to get them to sign your hold harmless first before you ask them to come over. And in no time, in your inbox on Facebook, there'll be hundreds of people fighting for the opportunity to help you put your cabinets in. Now, that's all you have to do. Now remember, if you have a little trouble with that, because of this big win we have since the Democrats have taken power and put the Biden economics working, you'll have plenty of time. Plenty of time to get with your social media, start building your genuine friends, with your likes and laughs and ahas and those sort of things, and just really embrace yourself with that, because the key to success in this one is to be genuine. And you'll have several weeks to fake that, especially since it's 8 to 12 weeks to get cabinets in. And of course, there's no supply chain issues with the equipment that you bought or desire to buy to go with your cabinets. And that itself is a win if there ever was one for Biden economics. So there you have that. That's great. Now you can go to church, synagogue, in your civic clubs, such as your Ruritan and your Lions Club, that sort of thing, your Moose Lodges. If you're a veteran, you can try your VFW, whatever it takes to find yourself some new friends during the weeks ahead of time when your equipment and cabinets are due to come in. Just remember, if you can fake being genuine, you have number 7 whipped. Which leads us to number 6, sympathy. Now, if you're extremely blessed, remind people that you're 61 years old, in terrible shape. You have artificial knees after having suffered through about 12 years of leg damage, and the bodged up job that was done there is not really working. How your daily pain is there. That's a win. And coming in for the double win is if you have a shoulder which has been permanently disabled for 30 years or 3 decades or more away, reminding that no, you might think that not being able to throw a ball to your grandkids, your kids, or even your dog is a terrible thing to live with. Remember, that's sympathy. That's a win-win. And coming in for the trifecta of the wins, if you're lucky, if you're very well blessed, you'll have been recently run over, destroying your car, causing cervical damage, shoulder damage on the good shoulder, and that's your trifecta of sympathy. Now, if that doesn't win, what can you do next? Well, that leads us to number 5 on our list, guilt. Now, here's where we look back to the mothers in our lives, because they've done so much to help us, such as reflect back in when you're very young. And your mother says to you, oh, is it so much with all that I do for you to put your dirty, nasty drawers in the hamper when I do the laundry? Do I not cook and clean for you? Do I not make sure that you have clean shorts to go to school with so that the kids don't make fun of you? Is it so much that you can't put your clothes in the hamper? And of course, they are bastions of wealth on this knowledge, and we must, of course, take our opportunities to thank our mothers, which, if they're a good old country girl, maybe they can help you lift your oven up and put it in. Now, if that doesn't work, try number 4 on our list, bargaining and bribery. Now, key tip here is you have to always imagine the cost, compare in your head the cost of bribery to that of number 8, stubbing a check. The key to bribery is it needs to be less than what it would cost you to stub a check and have someone just come in and do it for you. We don't want that, do we? Because then we can't get on our social media and tell how we flex to put this in ourselves. Right. So here's the key. Find you a good old boy. Maybe buy him some beer, barbecue, or bourbon. You can do wonders with that sort of thing, but be careful. Do not suggest Bud Light. Don't even go there. That's toxic at the beginning, and you want to be politically correct. So just avoid that whole discussion whatsoever. Likewise, avoid the Belgian beers and the pumpkin spice and watermelon flavored and the IPAs that taste like someone cleaned the vat with Pine Sol. Avoid those altogether. Stay away from politics. It's poison. What you want to do is pick something like Yingling Lager Traditional. It's brewed by Americans for Americans. This is not a product placement. So, beer, barbecue, bourbon, these things can often work as bribes and often are much cheaper than having someone stub a check. Which brings us to our next item on the list. Number 3, veiled threats. Remind people that you're 61 years old and your brain is fading, and sometimes, when you're on Facebook, where your buddy's wife may also be, that when you were down in Columbus, Georgia, and he wanted to go down to Victory Drive and you went with him and you said, no, don't do that, that you're just afraid you might forget about that whole experience and detail it in detailed, painful details on Facebook where the whole world can see. Now, if they don't respond to veiled threats, go to our next one on the list. Begging. Number 2, beg. Beg for help. Now, this is easier than it might sound because, as you know, all of your friends are just mere reflections of us. So psychology, modern psychology teaches us that, and it's pretty straightforward that we are, in our Adamic nature, selfish individuals, and we just want to have our needs fulfilled. Go back to when you were dealing with your mothers and she was trying to get you to put your dirty, nasty shorts in the hamper. Remember that it's all about you. Now, what you need to remember is being selfish, narcissistic, self-centered twat, the chances are your friends will also be selfish, self-centered, narcissistic twats and will only want to take care of what's good for them. Now, You might think this is a dead end of loss at this point in time, but it's really to your advantage. Let me explain to you. Because of this, a narcissist will never recognize that they are selfish, self-centered, self-absorbed twat. So that's a key. So you know that you're the same way, but you can just simply phrase it that you've now realized that you've never helped them with a project when they were in need, and you realize the error and the sin of your ways, and you're feeling really bad about that. And then if they're truly like you, they'll pop up and think of those many times when you didn't help them and you were called upon to do so, and they will say, yes, you are correct. That's a win for you. A win for you and your cabinetry and getting your equipment installed. Why? Because they'll never see it coming. And remember, it's all a lie. You're not really a selfish jerk yourself. That brings us to our number one on the list, groveling. Don't be afraid to grovel. Get yourself prostrate on the ground. Crawl, beg, plead, grab them by the ankles if necessary. Please help me put my cabinets in and my equipment in, and they'll just find a way to make it happen for you. We hope these tips have been good for you to understand the 8 tips of how to get your equipment installed, and we'll proceed with the show now. Hey, appreciate you watching. Do me a favor if you will, subscribe to the channel, either the YouTube or the Rumble channel, which this appears in. And if you can, check the notification bell or settings to make sure that you get notified when new videos are posted. Appreciate it. All right, now that we've got the silliness out of the way, let's talk about something dealing with installation. Now, you know that when you're doing just an appliance upgrade, that the job is significantly simpler. And by that, it just simply means that you're doing like for like. You're taking out an old appliance, put another one in. It's the same height, use the same cutouts, and the electricity, the power requirements are the same. Now, in some older houses, this can be a bit of a problem because some of the older ones didn't necessarily have a neutral, and most of the new things you're going to find are. So even with that, there can be some complication. But what we're talking about is putting a new unit in a new cabinet. And those cabinets are very expensive, and they tend to take a long time to show up. Cabinets are running 8 to 12 weeks now, I suppose. And you can get some cheaper ones. You can get some what we call box cabinets, and you have to then put them together like an IKEA bed. And that takes some time there too. But it is an option. You can often get those with much restricted options as far as what cabinetry you can get. Now, another thing you want to keep in mind is the rule of threes. The rule of the threes says that your oven box needs to be 3 inches larger than the oven size. And these cabinet bases in general are going to come into, and the tops are going to come in 3-inch increments on the width. So if you had a 27-inch box, a 27-inch oven's not going to fit, generally speaking. So you get a 27-inch box that's normally going to be for a 24-inch oven, which is a pretty small oven. Most you're going to find are going to be 27 and 30 inches. A 30-inch oven goes in a 33-inch cabinet. 27 goes into 30. When you get a virgin box, and it's all mounted and it's level and plumb and straight and it's set correctly, you still need to use a square to make sure, because when your unit goes in, your oven is going to be rectangular and it's not going to fit in a hole that's cocked. You may have it right on the top and right on the bottom, but if the sides are not at a 90-degree angle, you may run out of area that the trim will cover and it not sit right. So it's very important that you measure twice or 3 times and cut once and be darn sure. Now, here are some instructions. They're pretty straight, pretty easy. One of the things you might want to do, since it covers both 27 and 30-inch ovens, they're the most common, I'm sure, is you want to maybe take a blue piece of masking tape and tape out the opposing column for the unit you don't have, because you don't want to, when you're making your transcriptions and you've taped off your cabinet and you're trying to find center and your verticals and angles that you want to put on it, and make sure you get it centered and centered into space vertically as well as horizontally. You really want to take some serious time making sure that that's correct before you cut it up, because you can't uncut a cabinet. You might be able to patch it somehow, but in general it's not too easy to do. So now that we have it taped off, we're going to cut it out. Probably make a mess. Let's see if we can't feel cute today. Now here's a little tip. You don't have to do this, but see, I've got some corners pinned down with some little baby clamps, because the actual hole we're cutting out is a little bit bigger than that, and we don't want the saw to bind and end up making a mess if the big piece we're cutting out gets to being floppy on us. Now, I have seen videos on YouTube where people take out a single oven and replace it with a double. Now, generally speaking, I would say that is probably not going to work unless you rewire for that specific appliance, because what was in there was smaller and probably older, may or may not have a neutral. And if you think about it, double ovens are what they say they are. They are two ovens, and you'd only have enough power there set up for a single oven. So I've seen cases where they cut out a bottom drawer, build a shelf, and set the oven on it, but I'm assuming they have to rewire it. Now, I can't say it can never be done, simply because if the old oven was a high wattage, a convection oven with a big blower, big motor blower in there, it may actually have enough power available, maybe for two regular dry ovens, just simple low wattage dry ovens. You might find one that matches, so it might be able to be done, but in general, I would take those kind of videos with a grain of salt. This has been selected and paired with the cabinet, so it should work. In theory, all we need to do is make the 4 cuts. Now, I always like to drill out the corner and take a scroll saw or jigsaw, saber saw, whatever you might want to call it, with a fine tooth on there, something for wood, but not super aggressive, because I don't want to chip out parts of the cabinet if that one of those big teeth were to take and lift a piece or a strand of that wood. I don't want to ruin the cabinet with being too fast. Now, slow is sometimes laborious, and it may take you an hour to cut it, but remember, you only have to cut it once when you put it in if you do it right, and then you're done for the life of those two things, or at least until you change out with something similar. So on your instruction, like I say, first tip is to take a little piece of masking tape, tape off the wrong column, so when you're going back and forth between the cabinet that's now in place and the paperwork to go with the oven, that you're not accidentally grabbing the wrong C dimension for the wrong oven. That's simple, but you believe it, it can happen. Also, make sure that you have your verticals and your horizontals very well defined, because you can put them. But it's more than that. When you put a cabinet in, it's in place, it's stuck, it doesn't really move. It's only where you put that oven that goes. And sometimes the cabinets have, like we see here in this case, they have on the top and the bottom a wall that has a series of holes that you put the shelf holders. Now, this particular cabinet came with 2 shelves. They don't go in the top. I could have spread them into the top, but then I have an awfully deep, I got a 24-inch deep shelf that's very short, and that's not very good. So normally what you would do is use that bottom shelf to pick the place in the cabinet that you want that oven to sit based upon its dimensions. Now, you need to also pay attention to the perimeter, the clearance that it has around the hole after you cut it out, because you're going to have a little bit of overlap at the bottom and the sides and the top. So you want to pick your bottom of your cabinet where it's going to line out with a shelf, or you can use a pedestal if you have a double oven, or a pedestal goes with your single. You can do that, or you can make one if that's necessary to get it balanced out. But remember, if you cut that and you've cut out your rectangle and you find out you want to lower it down for one reason or another, it's already cut at the top. It's already cut at the top. And then you end up with a hole that's going to be too big if you can't make that shelf work. So you'll end up fabricating something for the bottom. I need to put an apology in here. This is going to run a little bit long. As I'm going through the final edit, I find I'm repeating myself, and I'm not really sure I'm being clear. I have it here, but I'm having a little trouble making the connection to get it here and to here so that you get it where you are. What's going on in this case, in these wall oven boxes, they're big, they're normally have a top section and a bottom section because the oven's not floor to ceiling, right? That top section, in my case, where I have doors that open and close, that's open, it breathes just naturally because it's not sealed off. The bottom section where the drawers are is also not sealed off because we have drawers in there. But the middle section needs to be sealed off. Now, I don't know how many videos we've seen out there on the internet where somebody's ripping cabinets off the wall. There are these big ugly diagonals where the wire wasn't in the right spot, so they just take a hole saw, a keyhole saw, hand saw, and cut a slot up and then pull that wire down, and they don't patch the sheetrock. You want your sheetrock patched in the back before you put the cabinet on, and the electric box properly located. If you have to move that before you set the cabinet, move it and then repatch the wall, because you don't want air leaking out of that wall, coming through the wall or going into the wall. Likewise, when you cut the back of the cabinet, how many of these videos out here on YouTube do you see? You've got this big ugly hole in the back of the cabinet where the electric box is coming through, and they didn't measure well getting the cabinet in its spot. and the cover doesn't seal up the back of the middle chamber. The middle chamber needs to be sealed. So while I go to a lot of examples of why you want to get that transferred from this piece of paper to your cabinet for the layout, you can't just take that size of hole and put it anywhere in that box, because your oven has to sit on a shelf. In the opening, you see a piece in there laying diagonal. It's actually cocked down. If you're looking at it, if I'm the cabinet, it's actually laid in there crooked. And what that is that's the piece you have to locate, because that will define where that bottom of the lip needs to be. And that comes off of this piece of paper. Now, the middle box has to be sealed for the oven to breathe. It either pulls air in the top and pushes it out the bottom, or it's pulling it in the bottom and pushing it out the top. If the box leaks, it's not going to breathe its best, and it's not going to be what you want. So you want it to be sealed all around, and your rectangle that you cut out for the cutout that the piece of paper says do, you want it to be tight so that it seals and it does move the air correctly. The problem that I'm trying to explain is, in the box they'll give you, they almost always will give you, I've never seen they didn't, but maybe there's somebody who doesn't, you'll have an extra shelf, and you locate that shelf. The holes in the walls of your cabinet, they show them often going all the way to the ceiling, and it's ridiculous. There's no purpose for that, except that's just how the machine makes the walls go. The little ledges that you can put in there to hold the shelf down may be a little too high or a little too low. Now, very few people are going to go to, in my opinion, in my experience, are going to go to the trouble of making sure your oven is actually centered between the doors above and the drawers below, or doors if you got doors below. They're going to find a place where it does fit, and you have a little clearance at the top and the bottom, and they're just going to put that little shelf in there on those little holders, and then they'll put the bottom of the rectangle level with that shelf so that it goes up and it fits in there nice and tight. And you won't see it because the oven will be in the way, and you won't see that rat hole around the electric because there's an oven in the way, and you won't see the rat holes down the wall where they've pulled the wire because the box is in the way. And so they just kind of get it high. It's quick, it's kind of dirty, but it's not the best way to do it. So what I ended up doing when I measured out where the rectangle would be on the outside, I couldn't just cut that without making allowances for bringing the oven up or down. And so I ended up having to make a little pedestal, a little structure in there that it would just sit on. Now, around the edges of that middle shelf that's inside of that chamber, the only shelf that's there between the ceiling and the floor that's sealed up, that doesn't have to be sealed because it's not going to pull any air anywhere, and the oven just sits directly on that shelf. But that shelf can be off because of where those holes are not in the exact place you want it to end up with your oven looking right from here on out from the outside. So there's a lot of effort you need to make, making sure that you don't screw up and get the wrong dimensions for the wrong oven when you're laying out your hole. And you can't have it cocked, and you can't have it parallelogrammed because that's going to make it too wide at the sides or wrong at the top, and it's not going to fit right. So you'll probably, when you're doing your layout, have to check those holes to see if any of them do in fact work out right. But if they don't work out right at the top of that shelf, you'll have to build something to get it at the right elevation so that when you lay your rectangle on your masking tape and draw it out, that rectangle is center of the space in the front of the cabinet, and yet you have the bottom shelf, that middle shelf, that extra shelf that they give you at a good elevation so it actually supports the oven. Does that make sense? Now I'm going to go back and put this into the video, and hopefully it'll make sense and you won't mind the fact that I lengthened the video by a few minutes with this explanation. And now we're ready to kick into the video, some of these little short video segments. I know they're short because the rest of the video is long, and if you want, look for the video on the microwave when it comes in. That's a bit of a job, cleaning that up. It's all doable. We're ready to go in, and we have our power connected. Should be high enough that it should fall in this area right here and be okay. I find out in just a minute. Once I had it up on the table, I was able just to kind of scoot it back a little bit where then I could lift it up at an angle, push it right on in. Went in, sat in. I haven't screwed it in yet. But you can see we don't have much of an edge for covering up. That's why it needs to be cut pretty cleanly, pretty nicely. What do you think? Well, as you can see, we got her in. We had put the bottom piece of trim, which really looks a little awkward. It doesn't quite fit the width. Of course, it doesn't really fit the width at the top. I don't know what they're doing. Put this pan back in. And of course it has 2 screws just there. Now they don't fit very well. They feel like they're a little bit too big for the space they go. But we had to put the door back on. The clock is running. So the panel has come alive. We just got to button her up now. So once we get the door on, we'll look at it again just to see if it looked like I managed to get that center one way or the other. While I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, planning is critical. Let's see if my calculations and measurements were worth the time it took as well as cutting it. Let's see if we are centered on the top and on the bottom. Drawers on the bottom, doors on the top. Let's go over here. We'll open the door. Put the tape down on the drawer. Looks like it's 1.5 inches. On the top, looks like it's 1.5 inches. Plan on taking a full day, and if you don't need it, you don't need it. But if you have limited access to help, like if you live in a country like I do and you have to beg your brothers to come give you a little hand here and there, and it's a long drive over and a long drive back, you want to be respectful of the time. Buy them lunch. Have some lunch ready for them. Even if you get done before lunch, go ahead and feed them lunch and send them on their way happy. They're doing you a favor. This type of thing is often farmed out to subcontractors, and they charge quite a bit for the installation, and there's a reason for it. If you've ever done it, you'll figure out why they charge like they do, because those wall ovens are heavy and they don't just miracle themselves into the wall. So a virgin cabinet has to be measured and cut very, very precisely. What saw you use is going to be up to you. I like to use I did in fact in this case use a scroll saw to do it with a very fine tooth, and took a long time to do it and make sure it was right, as opposed to using my little baby battery powered circular saw. If you're going to use like a little circular saw, you still need to probably go in, drill your corners, cut them out with a scroll saw so that the radius of the blade works, and you want to get a good fine tooth comb for finish work to do that, because again, you don't want it to lift up and ruin the cabinet, because it's just easier to take a little bit of time once and do it right than to get all froggy and try to beat a self-imposed deadline on getting it done and mess the cabinet up. Because again, they're like 8 to 12 weeks getting them in, and of course the appliances, we still have some supply chain issues, that sort of thing. Make sure your wiring and your power is right and not part of the scope.